Hi everyone, welcome so much to New Life Community Fellowship's online services. I'm Pastor Sion and we are so glad that you could join us today. We're glad that you're here. I hope that you are all safe and doing well wherever you may be. If there's any specific way that we can support you in this time or be praying for you, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Of course, we want to continue to be here for our community as we begin to open up again. And speaking of reopening, I really hope that if you are on Facebook that you'll engage with us in the live stream chat box. We're going to share a couple links there. The first one is a subscription link for our weekly newsletter, and that's just a place where we're able to check in with you as our family, to let you know about any upcoming virtual events that we have during the week. And then also that's where we're sharing the updates about our reopening strategy as we continue to prayerfully walk that journey. And so I really encourage you to sign up for the newsletter if you haven't done that yet. And then the second link will be for online giving if you're part of our regular family and that's one of the ways in which you worship. We would love to have you be able to utilize that link. And of course, all of these details, subscription links, giving links, and more can be found on our website at new-life.org. So once again, thank you so much for being here today. And now I just ask that you'll join us in preparing your hearts and prepare the atmosphere wherever you may be watching from right now as we enter together into a time of worship.
From the highest of highs to the depths of the sea, creation's revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring, every creature unique in the song that it sings. All this gravy, indescribable, unconceivable. You place the stars in the sky and you move around me. You are amazing, God. All powerful, unsayable, awestruck, we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. Who is told every lightning where it should go? Unseen heavenly storehouses laden with snow. Who imagined the sun and gave source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the glories of night. None can fathom, indescribable, unconceivable. You place the stars in the sky and you moon and lightning. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck, we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. You are amazing, God. To the G. Indescribable, unconceivable. You place the stars in the sky and you moon and lightning. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, unconceivable. You place the stars in the sky and you moon and lightning. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing,
Good morning. This is Pastor Art, and I am here with my good friend Tammy Vogt. Her and James are dear friends out of Ontario, Oregon. Did you know there's an Ontario in Oregon? It's so close to Idaho, it has an Idaho zip code. Can you say hi, Tammy?
Hi everybody.
And how long have we been serving and working together, Tammy?
I think we've been I have been following you. I've been in your huddle for probably about 4 years.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
And so Tammy's somebody that is just so proud of and so pleased to share her life with you today.
Mhm.
And we're just going to jump in. We've been talking about the Lord's Prayer, the way Jesus taught his disciples to pray. And we are disciples, and that means that we're learners. And one of the tough things about the Lord's Prayer, I think, Tammy, is many of us learn this by rote. And when we say it or pray it, it's a static thing. We're not learning, you know.
Right.
Jesus is teaching us how to pray, and I think every time we come to this prayer, that it's an invitation and a challenge to
Mhm.
learn how to talk to our Heavenly Father. And so I'm just going to read the first few verses here. So far, we have talked about the word our. There's a very inclusive sense that there's nobody on the planet that can't say our. It means that we're included. And we, as followers of Jesus, have the privilege to know that we can call God our Father. And we talked about what that meant, that sense of identity, that God is our Father. And the hour says we're in it together. We're not alone. We belong. We're a part of something. And we're a part of a family. And that God is our Father. And is not like any other father. He is our Father dwelling in the heavenly realms. May the glory of your name be the center on which our lives turn. And I love that translation, you know.
Mhm.
Immediately I'm convicted. That's often not true, but there's the invitation to put my Father right there at the top. And then we talked about manifest your kingdom realm and cause your every purpose to be fulfilled on earth just as it is in heaven. And so we've talked about what it means to uh, be holy, to keep his name holy, to live like him, to value his kingdom, and to do his will. And today, the translation that we have in verse 11, Matthew chapter 6, says, "We acknowledge you as our provider of all we need each day." And so just with that, Tammy, when you hear or think about uh, these words, what's Jesus trying to tell us? Why does he throw that in? Why is that part of the prayer?
Hmm. I think maybe I guess the two things that come to my mind is that it reminds you who he is and how consistent he is.
Hmm.
That we acknowledge you as our provider and all we need each day.
Yeah.
So it's not just, it's about the character of God, and it's about how the character of God shows up for you every single day.
Yeah.
Can
And
be counted on.
one of the ways we talk about that, you and I, is it's that God is both our Father and our King. And just what you said, just breaking that down a little bit,
Mhm.
is the character. Uh, he's my Father, and his character is to provide. And as King, he's actually able to do
Yeah.
that, to provide. Not only does he want to, because I want to do a lot of good things, but God not only wants to, he's actually able to do that. How does that, you believe that all the time?
Well, I mean, I come to believe it more as I come to know who he is, right? And like one of the things that you've always taught me when you talk about like the king and the father, those roles, is that I think it's sometimes easier for me to think about my father being good because I have a father who is really good. But whenever you've talked to me about the king, you're like, oh no, that this is a good king, right? Like this
Yeah.
is a king who takes care of his kingdom
Yeah.
and is not a king who rules with a hard fist, but this is a good king
Yeah.
who takes care of his people. And that's why I think the character is so important, because I can't trust in something or someone unless I believe that they care about me. They have good character. They're worthy of trusting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
one of the things you just said there was he's a good king and he
Mhm.
takes care of his kingdom. And as I think about kings and I think about kings taking care of their kingdom, they're not thinking about their people. They're thinking about their stuff and what their people can do for them. And here the idea of a good king is he cares about his people.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you said, I had a good father. Uh, I had a father that did the best he could. I did the best I could. And I can't tell you how often I look back or I hear things and go, oh, that would you guys believe my heart instead of what I did? As I think about my adult grown children today,
Yeah.
and so I'm thinking about in this translation here, it said, we acknowledge you as our provider of all we need each day. Other translations uh, say, give us our daily bread. And I like this translation because it's not just about bread. It's not about Wonder Bread. It's not just about a loaf of bread. It's about provision and what that uh, bread symbolizes.
Yeah.
And by the way, we didn't mention this, but you've got a few kids.
I do have a few kids. Yeah, kids.
Right.
They're not so kid-like anymore.
Right.
But I have a son and a daughter-in-law, and Kyler and Becky. They live in Portland, just south of Portland now. And then I have 3 other daughters, Audrey, Anna, and Brenna, who are all students at Boise State University. Yeah.
Mhm. I'm just thinking about you and James being parents. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're saying, I had a good father, I think your daughters have a good mother and a good father. And uh, even as much as they know that you're a good mom and dad,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they worry about provision sometimes. Yeah.
They do. Yeah, absolutely. And I think same for me. Like it took me a while to trust that God is my provider. Still, I'm learning to trust in that, to see that as one of the roles that one of the parts of his character. Like whenever I hear God is love, that seems sometimes more tangible to me. Like I've experienced that, so I can believe that easily. But provider, um, that gets down to the nitty gritty of my day to day kind
Mhm.
of bread and butter. How the bill's going to get paid, how are things going to be accomplished around here. So it's taken me a while to acknowledge, oh, you're my provider. Like that's something that you are, and that's something that I can trust.
Why do you think Jesus wants us to know that our Heavenly Father is our provider?
Hmm.
If I'm not believing God is my provider, what am I believing?
Well, I I guess maybe the thing that my mind goes to the most is that I get caught up in worry, um,
Mm.
because then I got to provide everything for myself, right? And I know my own inadequacies. I know where things can fall short. I know how limited my resources are. But if we can see the Father as our provider and begin to grasp the limitless resources, the limitless way that He can show up in the day to day and show us His love, and take care of us, then we don't live our lives in worry and fear. Takes a while to learn that. I'm still learning it, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's good for us to think of God and acknowledge that you're my provider.
And I think that's really helpful on the other side of anxiety, worry, is self-confidence, that I'm a self-made man. I provide for myself. I don't need anybody. And I think that affects us spiritually too, doesn't it? Affects
Oh
how we
yeah,
live?
I would think so.
I would think so.
I don't know that I've felt that side as much as I've felt the other side. But if we can land in the land of pride too, like I don't need you. And then you lose out on the sweetness of this side of the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I,
Yeah.
I think as I look out at the world, as I look in our culture, we live in a culture that is self-dependent. It's like what I earn, what I have, what I make, what I save. And Jesus talks a lot about money, he talks a lot about hoarding and storing up our treasures and all these kinds of things. And I think I think at the heart of this is it's about relationship. It's not all on me, and I don't go do this, and it's not all on God, but it's God has gifted me and empowered me and placed me in a place where he wants me to know and experience his love. And and I hate to use the word dependent, okay, because that seems like disability in a sense, a negative thing. But I think it's acknowledging the relationship, acknowledging the source. That's why I like this translation, that we acknowledge you as my provider. And there's this idea that everything that comes to me is brought to you by you. Everything that comes to me comes down from the Father of lights, every good and perfect gift. Yeah.
Yeah.
And am I going about doing my stuff and working hard thinking I'm preparing the way, for things to come in my life, that it's dependent on me? Or am I recognizing that all the ways that anything good comes is that he's actually the source? And so there's that relational dependency, that
Yeah.
the things that come into my life because of his love and his care and his ability to provide for me, and living with a regular acknowledgement of that. Let me give you a little space
Yeah.
here.
Well, I guess, and what I'm thinking about as you're talking is just, if we live in the land of, I got this, like I can handle this. I can make my own way. I can make my own money. I can, have my own resources. And maybe you're really good at that, and maybe you have found a sense of security in that. But then what happens when COVID happens, and there is a worldwide pandemic? Then what happens to where you have placed your confidence and where you have placed your trust? I mean, I've heard lots of stories about people's companies folding right now, people in the entertainment business, people who were supporting the entertainment business, people who were supporting tourism, right? And from high dollar people to the people who changed the sheets on the bed, even if they had confidence, just, well, I got a good job, I know the paycheck's going to come in, and all of a sudden the paycheck isn't coming in.
Yeah.
For us personally, James and I at Origins, we have a beautiful people here, and we've always been kind of fragile financially, and this COVID has tipped it for us. So we've had to make some very big life changes for this church here because of it. But if your confidence is in my next paycheck, or my retirement fund, or my stocks and the stock market, and then something happens that rattles that, then you get rattled with it. I think that Jesus wants us to see God as our Father, as our provider, because it can't be rattled like that. It can't be shaken like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, right now, that's really important for me to know.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that you brought brought up the pandemic, let's just ignore that. But I think one of the things that's happening is it's really exposing where our treasure is. It's exposing what I'm trusting, have
Yeah.
been trusting in. Some of us are feeling super vulnerable. Some of us are going, oh yeah, no, I got a fort. I'm good, And I know you guys are going through some transition, and you have been. How have you been leaning in, fighting that? I don't want to say fighting that battle, okay? It is a battle, but
Mhm.
but can you give us an example of how you've been entering into that uh, self-dependence, and when kind of the rug's pulled out from under you, and yet being dependent? How's that
Yeah. What has
pushing
that
both
been
of them?
looking like in the day to day, in my daily bread land? So, there sometimes you can see the writing on the wall that some things are going to change, and that some things are fragile, and that they're reaching that tipping point. And we saw that, and then recognized very quickly COVID escalated everything, right? So I think that's when you always have a choice on, am I going to, in this way, am I going to go on what I feel, or am I going to go on what I've known and what I've experienced and what I know to be true about who my God is to me? That's why the character thing is so important, because what I know and feel in moments where the tangible is slipping through my fingers is I feel fear like everybody else. I can get scared, I can worry, I can doubt, I can go to that land way quicker than I want to admit that I can go in that land. But what helps me is what helps me is a couple of things. One is knowing where I've been before and how the provider has shown up in my life. And then also just kind of some of the illustrations, pictures that God's been giving to me.
So welcome back. We just had a little blip there, and had to come back on another day. And where we had just left off, we're going to pick up Tammy Vogt, a pastor out in Ontario, Oregon, and my good friend is going to pick up. She was just saying that when it comes to this provision, acknowledging God as our provider, that God has actually given her some different words and images on that. So Tammy, jump in and continue on, please.
Sure. So I know God always tends to speak to me in images and pictures, because I probably like the parables. That's where I get it. That's why it started making sense in my brain.
Yeah, justify it with the Bible. There you go.
And probably this one has been consistent in my mind since, probably February, March of this year, maybe even a little earlier. The church that we pastor is pretty fragile financially, has always been, because of who we're made up of. And then COVID hit, and fragile became very fragile.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't, we've got this. We've always kind of depended, not kind of, but definitely depended just upon God's provision for this people and for our lives, because we've been full-time ministers. And when you start seeing that begin to break down, and you don't see provision tangibly, it can cause fear. And so I was just began to lean in. I didn't want to go down paths of fear. And so I really felt like God just gave me this idea and a picture of a river. And now we live in Eastern Oregon, and there's this reservoir called Bully Creek. And just up the high side of Bully Creek is this stream that flows into the reservoir. And we like to go out there and just hang out. It's peaceful, it's quiet. And one day I just dropped I think I dropped a twig or a leaf or something in, and I just watched it meander down the whole thing. And it just really began to speak to me. And I think it's abiding language. So it is where is God flowing? Where is the way of Jesus flowing in my life? And what can that look like sometimes? Sometimes it flows into shallow areas and it takes a while to get through. Sometimes it gets caught in like a little eddy and spins, and I learn lessons there, and then it'll shoot me out and take me on down the path. But there's a way down the river that I can't see, and I just have to trust in the flow to take me there. And so my prayer began to be just keep me where the water's flowing. Like, just keep me in the flow. I don't have to understand it all. I don't have to see it all. But my prayer is to just keep me in the flow of where you are at work in my life. And every time I started to feel fear of a lack of provision or lack of like knowing what's coming next because I want to control something, I would just hear that, stay in the flow. Hey, Tam, just stay in the flow. One day particularly, I was not seeing the bottom line. Actually, I was seeing the bottom line, and it didn't look good. And I was particularly fighting fear. And I started peppering my husband with some questions and peppering God with some questions. And what I heard was just, hey, Tam, don't paddle, don't kick. Like, you don't need to force this. You don't need to work hard. I just need you to rest in me. I need you to stay in the flow of where I'm at. And so that's been my prayer, connected with provision of resources and of knowing a plan or what's coming next. Is just trust me, stay in the flow.
I think that's one of the big points of this whole thing, whether, when we say our daily bread or you're my provider, it's not just about bread. There's an image, that kind of takes us back to the wilderness, with the manna. And it's about a dependence on God, that I'm living each day with a dependence on God. And in the land of I got this, there is no dependence on God. And thinking of your imagery, I remember teaching in the 90s about something kind of similar, about whirling eddies, that people just get caught, in that river off to the side. There's this whirling eddy, and I'm trying to put that together with, don't kick, don't paddle, because when you're spinning around, I mean, some people, you get into that panic and that's all you see.
Yeah.
And that doesn't allow you to see where God is, where the way forward is when God presents the opportunity. And you're wearing yourself out, trying to get out but if the river's going this way and you're facing the other way and you're using all your energy before you get around here to the other side of the river, there's no chance for you to get in the flow. You've worn yourself out. So there's that sense of trust in the flow, know that God's with you and God's present. And with that, we're talking about scarcity, and provision isn't just food. It's everything that we need.
Absolutely.
What else do you want to add?
Well, I guess a couple of things, maybe in that I don't have to be a perfect floater either. Because it's not about my performance on the river. And if I do get a little scared and I kick or paddle or out of my fear, I try to hold on to, a branch sticking out on the side to feel some kind of control. I'm not condemned for that, but I'm gently reminded, hey, Tam, just float. Just float. Yeah. And so I'm so thankful that I'm unknown, and I can trust the character of God, and this river flow just to take me forward. I mean, a few things that I've just learned along the way about myself when it comes to provision and traps that I get into with scarcity is, what do I do when fear starts to mount? What do I do when the bottom line is not adding up with where I need it to be? What do I do when I don't see how this is going to work out?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been there many times. And I think there's two things that I have learned that help me stay in the flow. And one is when times of fear like come up like that, one is to remember.
Yeah.
Like, remember where God has shown up in moments like that in my past. And I've walked, I've been a follower of Jesus for a really long time now. So I've got these, right? I've got these stories where I didn't know how this was going to happen. And yet something unexpected happened that brought in provision when it was needed. I was living in ways of trust, like our leading origins, my church, and we didn't know where we were going to move to next. They're going to triple our rent. Okay, but God's already got a place planned for us, until he led us to the place where we're at right now, where people actually gave us this building. Totally didn't see that coming, had no money to purchase a building. We got it for $1. It's a great story, but it's a great story of provision. So whenever I start to fear, it's good to remind myself, where has God been faithful?
Yeah.
In my life. The second thing is, if my faith fails, then I borrow it. So I found in the midst of this most recent season, I found Hebrews 11 again.
Mm-hmm.
And Hebrews is this great chapter about faith. And it just goes through all of these stories of people across the ages who put their faith in a God who showed up for them. By faith, they did this. By faith, they believed this. By faith, they took this land. By faith, this child was given. By faith,
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends with chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, the river, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And it says, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. My daughter has a much younger faith than I have. And so when she hits a hard spot, she'll say, Mom, I don't have what you have to get through this. And so I say, well, then borrow mine.
Yeah.
Right? Can you trust me? And she'll say, yeah, I can trust you. And I said, okay, you trust me. I'm going to trust God until you can trust him for yourself. So if your faith feels small, if you don't have the stories to remember yet, borrow it.
Yeah.
There's a whole book full of them. And that's, I think, the beauty of the body of Christ too, because there's stories of, hey, this is where God has been my provider.
So summing up there, the little meme that comes to my mind is there's practice is better than panic, practice remembering, and we see the scripture doing that. We see the Psalms over and over doing these things. We see, I don't have to give more examples. And then the other one is borrow faith. And my vocabulary for that, as I've been through this, is to leverage faith. I leverage someone else's faith, which is saying the same thing. You use a lever to enable you to do what somebody else can't, what I can't on my own. And so you got faith, I'll lean into yours. I don't have faith for right now. I'll hang on to that because I know God is good. I just don't know how to move this rock right now. So I think those are really good. And I hope if you're listening, if you're with us, those are two things, very practical, that you can, first of all, remember what God's done. And if you don't have a good history of memory, remember what God's done in somebody else's life. And if you don't have faith, borrow faith from somebody else that you can trust. They trust you, I trust them, so I can trust you. And it'd give us a place to stand. I think the other thing, Tammy, is I think on the opposite side, so we've been kind of talking about scarcity, and I think we see this in our culture a lot, is there are a lot of people that aren't dealing with scarcity. And sometimes there's not a dependence on God. There's a thank you for it, but not a dependence for it. And it's like when we get stuff, we're not supposed to be a hoarder. I think of Paul talks about though Jesus was rich, he became poor for us. And he didn't go, I earned this, I'm keeping it. I mean, that's Satan's thing, And so as I see in here, it's the heart of the Father that Jesus is reflecting. I'm not here just to keep everything I can. I'm here to empower you, to bring you into the kingdom, to show you the provision as well, to share the provision as well. So we tend to live in such a firm meritocracy, where what I got, I earned, and it's mine. And yet Jesus says, I had this, I owned it, but I didn't consider it something to be held onto. I let go. So though he was rich, he became poor so that we could become rich. And so part of the provision, as I was talking to my mom today, I said, Mom, so how's God provided for you? And, she could just go off. But one of the things is, he just always provides. And I'm like, well, so what's that mean? Money falls from the sky? She says, well, sometimes it's just people. And she began to tell me a story. She got 2 letters from this last surgery just the other day from 2 RNs, pretty sweet RNs, doing exactly what Jesus is saying. And they wrote her 2 cards telling her how much they appreciated her being their patient. And she's like, sometimes the provision isn't money, it's people. Yeah. And I think that's a good message for us. We're the people that bring the provision of God to other people as well. That's part of why he gives us provision, is so that we can share it, so that other people can experience the love and the provision of God.
Absolutely.
Amen?
Anything? And I think that's what I love too about this prayer, then, that leads us to the daily kind of faith walk that says, give us this day our daily bread. Like, show us today where you're going to show up in provision.
Yeah.
Show us what that's going to look like today. A few years ago,
Keep us paying attention.
Yeah. A few years ago, James and I got to take a trip for our 25th anniversary, and we went to Venice. And somebody told us, when you get to Venice, don't mark out a path of where you're going to go. Just start going and explore, because there's cool things around every corner, right? And so we did. We just felt like explorers all day. We're weaving in and out of these little streets and finding like these hidden staircases and things like that. I think whether it's the streets of Venice or whether it's the river that flows in unexpected ways, it's just this kind of living in the moment with who God is such an adventure.
Yep.
If you can see it that way, if you can rest in it, if you can surrender to it, it's such an adventure of where and how are you going to provide in this day.
And discovery is such a thrill. And when we're dependent, we're looking, When I'm not dependent, I'm not looking. I have what I need. I'm just going down the road. But that discovery with God, ongoing, of where are you providing? What are you giving? Promotes that thankful heart, sees how God provides in so many ways. Well, let me thank you for being with us, and tell you what, I'm gonna read the Lord's Prayer from the Passion, and how about I read a verse and you say it after me? And if you're here, congregation, today, you say it with Tammy. How's that?
Love you.
She has a much better rhythm than me. So, our Father dwelling in the heavenly realms,
Our Father, dwelling in the heavenly realms,
may the glory of your name
may the glory of your name
be the center on which our lives turn.
be the center on which our lives turn.
Manifest your kingdom realm
Manifest your kingdom realm
and cause your every purpose
and cause your every purpose
to be fulfilled on earth,
to be fulfilled on earth,
just as it is fulfilled in heaven.
just as it's fulfilled in heaven.
We acknowledge you as our provider
We acknowledge you as our provider
of all we need each day.
of all we need each day.
Forgive us the wrongs we have done,
Forgive us the wrongs we have done,
as we ourselves release forgiveness to those who have wronged us.
as we ourselves release forgiveness to those who have wronged us.
Rescue us every time we face tribulation,
Rescue us every time we face tribulation,
and set us free from evil.
and set us free from evil.
For you are the king who rules.
Say that one again.
You are the king who rules
You are the King who rules
with power and glory forever.
with power and glory forever.
Amen. All right. I know you have loved hearing from Tammy today. She is such a ray of light from heaven and your provision today. So I'm glad you discovered her, and hope you hear God's voice through her well. And we're going to go ahead and go to our worship team now, and then Sion to come back and have a few closing words for us. And everybody give us a thumbs up in the chat box for Tammy today.
So good to be with you. Thank you.
Great.
The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing with the
again so much for being here with us today. I was blessed by this time and by this service, and I just pray that you were as well. If you didn't catch it in the beginning, I just wanted to give a quick reminder that we'll be sharing a couple of links in our chat box. One of those is so that you can sign up for our weekly email newsletter. We would encourage you to get on the mailing list. This is where we send up information about events, reopening strategies, things like that. And of course, every week we're also going to include in there just a brief message from one of our pastors. We kind of call it our Worldview Wednesdays. And so every Wednesday we're going to be sharing on social media, but we put that in the weekly newsletter too in case you missed it. And it's just an opportunity for us to really take a moment to acknowledge and speak to some of the things that are going on in our society right now and what it looks like for us as believers to do the work that we have been called to do to advance the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And of course, the other link that we share in addition to the newsletter sign up is online giving. Encourage you to take advantage of that as well. Of course, please reach out. Let us know how we can be praying for you. We're so glad that you are here. We look forward to seeing you again next week at 10 a.m. We love you so much. Be blessed and have an amazing week, family. See you next week.